Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to NRW. I'm your host today, Rob, the movie guy, and I thank you very much for joining me here today. And I figured what better way to end the month of February than with a Jean-Claude Van Damme classic in Bloodsport. And this was a movie that came out back in February 26, 1988, so this year does mark the 33-year anniversary of this film's release. And I'm sure like many of you guys out there, this movie was the first film that I remember seeing Van Damme in first, because I do remember specifically after this movie I had seen Death Warrant, Cyborg, Double Impact, Lionheart, Universal Soldier, not in those particular order, but I remember Death Warrant specifically after this film. And Van Damme was just a breath of fresh air of action at that time, because he was doing those trademark high-flying kicks, and it wasn't a Van Damme film if those kicks were not in the movie. And though I have said this movie is a classic because it is a classic, but my opinion about this movie has changed since I was a little kid. Because when I first saw the film as a little kid, I thought this movie was one of the best things I'd ever seen. But then as the years have gone by, my opinions about this movie has changed a great deal. It went from being this beloved movie that I hold so close to my heart to a film that I just kind of almost in a weird way just distanced myself, not holding in such high regard. But that's not to take away that this film had an impact in a lot of people's lives and in the industry itself, because if it wasn't for this movie, we would have never gotten Scott Adkins, because there's a story that he tells everybody that when he was around 12 or 13 years old, he had saw this movie Bloodsport. He had called his mom over into the room and told her that that's what I want to do. I want to do what that guy does. So I don't want to talk too much shit about this film because he has inspired one of the greatest action stars of all time, in my opinion, in Scott Adkins. And I'm sure many of you guys may know this, but for those that don't, this movie had heavily inspired two of the biggest video game franchises of all time in Street Fighter and also Mortal Kombat. In fact, the character of Johnny Cage was heavily inspired by the character Frank Dux that Van Damme plays in this movie. And this movie definitely does have a lot of controversy around it, because this movie is based on the real-life claims of Frank Dux, who has made claims that he has participated in a real-life Kumite event, and he's also undefeated. He has a record of like 326 or 229 fights, and he's also made claims of having these world records of having the fastest knockout, among other things as well. And people have questioned his legitimacy and have also questioned all these stories that he has claimed about being in these Kumite fights and the trophies he's won and so on and so forth. And he's definitely a very controversial figure, and I would recommend for you guys to check out the story of Frank Dux, because it is very interesting, and I'll definitely touch upon that a little bit in this review, especially towards the end. But let's just get into the movie now. So the film starts off with Frank Dux, who in the film is a U.S. Army captain who was on his way out to Hong Kong to participate in this illegal Kumite fight. And Frank's Army superiors have learned about his participation in this Kumite event out in Hong Kong and had forbidden him to go to this event, but he escapes anyways and heads over to his sensei's home, Senzo Tanaka, to inform that he's on his way to Hong Kong to participate in this Kumite event. And through a flashback, we come to find out how Frank and his sensei Senzo Tanaka have first met, but there's no way that I'm going to do it justice by telling you how they do it, so let me just show you the clip so you can see for yourself.
You cannot get katana sword by stealing. You must earn it.
I wasn't going to steal it.
You didn't flinch. You have fighting spirit.
You're not gonna call the cops?
Not if we make a deal.
What kind of a deal?
So Tanaka decides to train Frank along with his son Shingo, and during the training sessions, Shingo and Frank do have a bit of a rivalry between each other, but during a event in school where Shingo gets picked on by these bullies, Frank steps in to confront these bullies and protect Shingo from these bullies, and they form a friendship through that. And then down the line, Shingo does die, although we don't really find out what it is he dies from. And Tanaka is obviously very saddened by this, and we learn a little bit about his history, especially with the connection to Hiroshima, and he decides he's no longer to be training anybody. But Frank convinces him in telling him that train me and I will honor your legacy, I will honor you in this upcoming Kumite. So Tanaka decides to do so in preparation for this Kumite event, and then Frank does get that invitation to participate in this Kumite out in Hong Kong. And 2 Legionnaire officers are sent over to America to find Leon, so that way they can bring him back over to the North African base in which he escaped from, so that way he can be court-martialed for disobeying orders. And, oh crap, hold on a second. This is the wrong movie. I'm sorry, I couldn't even tell the difference in the plot because they're so similar. Hold on a second, let me just get this corrected here. And here we go. All right, so this is what I meant to say. So we have 2 criminal investigation command officers that are sent over from the army to Hong Kong to find Frank and bring him back over to the base. And upon arriving in Hong Kong, Frank does form a friendship with another competitor in the Kumite in Ray Jackson, and they both also form a friendship with their guide in Hong Kong and also in the Kumite in Victor Lin. So all the competitors arrive at the location where the Kumite is going to be held at, and Frank runs into a bit of a problem with his invitation because he is representing Tanaka, and obviously he's not Japanese, and they question the legitimacy of his association with Shenzo Tanaka. So they asked him, well, if you are in fact a student of Tanaka, show us Denmak, which is basically a death touch, which requires him to break a brick at the very bottom of the stack and not destroy the other bricks along the way. So he's got to select that one brick and crack it, and that will apparently prove his legitimacy in being affiliated with the Tanaka clan, if you will. And he does prove that, and therefore they honor his invitation, and he's allowed to participate in this kumite. And we also have a journalist by the name of Janice who is wanting to learn about the kumite, and she's running into some problems with people not willing to talk with her to indulge information about what this kumite is all about. And she does eventually form a relationship with Frank, who does provide her some information, but is very reluctant to continue giving her more information, really for her safety, among other things. And despite that, they form a romantic relationship, although it doesn't really go anywhere. And then she finds a way to get inside the tournament to watch the event, and much to her surprise, she realizes how brutal this tournament really is, and is shocked to see the amount of violence that's involved with this, and is fearful for Frank's life, having seen how things get escalated here when it comes to the violence. And so far in this tournament, both Ray and Frank are undefeated, and it's not until when Ray faces up against the main villain in this movie, in Chung Lee, played by the legendary Bolo Young, where he gets defeated in a really brutal fashion. Well, brutal for this movie. And then from there, Frank vows to avenge his friend Ray by defeating Chung Lee and winning this tournament. But first, Janice goes over to the Chinese authorities, who are actually working with the 2 commanding officers that are looking for Frank in Hong Kong, and she tells them that Frank is actually participating in this kumite, and she knows where it's being held at, and she agrees to take the 2 commanding officers to this event so that way they can capture Frank after the fight occurs. I seriously think this is a similar plot that I've seen before from somewhere, but I'm just trying to remember from where I have seen this before. It's got to be a coincidence, right? It's got to be. And of course, Frank does make it to the finals up against Chung Lee, and he's actually winning that fight so far. So in an act of desperation, Chung Lee decides to cheat by throwing a crushed up salt pill into Frank's eyes, blinding him. But then Frank does remember his sensei's training, during where he blindfolded Frank to prepare for this handicap. So Frank does get the upper hand in that fight, and eventually makes Chung Lee submit verbally, allowing him to win this match. And after winning this tournament, Frank does volunteer to go back to the United States with these 2 commanding officers, and he also has a moment with Janice where he says goodbye to her before he leaves Hong Kong. And that is pretty much the end of the movie right there. There are a lot of things I have left out in the plot details because there's just so much to cover, because there's a lot of things I want to say about this movie, but I just have so much time to do this here. So let's just get started here with the positives, and then I'm going to get into the negatives. The first positive I want to point out here is that although my opinion about this movie has changed a great deal, I still have a lot of great memories with this movie. For any of you guys that watch my reviews on NRW will know that the action genre is my favorite genre of all time. And at that time, when I first saw this movie, which I said I believe was the first film that I ever saw Jean-Claude Van Damme in, he was a breath of fresh air, and you could see that he had a charisma about him that was different from Stallone and Schwarzenegger, who were also the big boys at that time. And for him to come out there to do something that was different, that was very appealing, especially in the action genre, he was just the coolest guy on earth for me. And every single time I had watched that film as a child, I always immersed myself in that world, because for me it was so captivating and how beautiful this film was shot. Because there are some shots of Hong Kong that I saw in this movie that I never really paid attention to before with other films. I just enjoyed it for what it was and then kind of went on with my day. And very few films actually stuck out for me where I actually took the time to analyze the shots that you saw in the movie. And Bloodsport was that film that made me do that. One interesting fact that I want to point out about this movie is that Bloodsport is actually one of the very few film productions that was able to shoot in the Kowloon Walled City, which was a city within Hong Kong that no longer exists anymore. I think it was demolished back in '93, if I remember reading correctly. And this was a ungoverned city that was run by the local triads and had a very high rate of prostitution, gambling, drug abuse. And this movie was able to capture a moment in time where the city was still very much alive and no longer exists. But if you look into the history of that city, you come to find out some very fascinating things about what led up to the building of the city and, of course, the demolition of the city as well. So I highly recommend you guys check that out. And for me personally, one of the best things about this film is in the character of Ray Jackson. In fact, I'm willing to say that he is actually by far the best thing about this whole film, because whenever he's in a scene, he actually adds more life to it. It's more fun with him around, and he has some of the funniest lines in the film. And his relationship that he has between himself and Frank seems like a very genuine friendship. So you actually do believe that camaraderie that they have with one another when they first meet up, when having that mutual respect and that instant connection. We also have that relationship that they have with Victor Lin as well when they first get introduced with him. And he's pretty much showing them around Hong Kong, especially in the Kowloon Walled City. And his encouragement of Frank, his concern for Frank as well too. It seems like a very genuine friendship between the three of them. And there are some funny moments in this movie, although things I found hilarious in the film were not intending on being funny, like this one scene here. Sad! Sad! His face just cracks me up in this scene every time I watch it. Just his eyes bulging out and for me, I found it hilarious. And as far as the story is concerned for this film, I actually do like the story very much. The idea of having this secret tournament out in this secret location that sends out invites to all the top fighters around the world, and they all have to compete against one another for them to find out who's the best fighter in the world. And it's a very appealing story, and I think the movie does a good job in telling it effectively. But that's pretty much where my positive ends here. So this is a perfect segue now to get into the negatives. The first negative I'm going to point out here is, I'm sure if you guys have noticed that in this review I have posted clips from the film Lionheart, because Lionheart and Bloodsport are pretty much the exact same story. There are some differences, of course, as far as the motivations for why the characters are fighting and the locations of the film as well. But whenever I watch this movie, I always look back at Lionheart and just think, Lionheart just did it better, because it is a better film than Bloodsport. And if any of you guys have ever seen my review for the film Lionheart, you'll know that one of the biggest criticisms I had about that movie was that the fight scenes in that film was pretty lame, and this film is no different. There's one particular moment that I remember in the film where this guy is kneeing another competitor in the face, and it's clearly obvious he's not hitting him. I mean, that knee to the face could even hurt a fly on the wall. So there are plenty of moments like that where some of the executions and the fights aren't really done all that well. There are some decent moments where you can see the realisms that is happening in the film when it comes to some of the fight scenes, but overall it really didn't leave much of an impression on me when it comes to the fighting in this film. And as I've already mentioned before in the beginning of this video, that this is a Jean-Claude Van Damme classic, but this is not my go-to Van Damme film. In fact, I wouldn't even go as far as putting it in the top 10, maybe in the top 20, but definitely in the very bottom of that list. And there are other films he's done that are way better than this movie. There's one film right now that I can easily recommend for everybody out there that should go watch this film, because it is one of the best films of all time. Before I get into my rating, I want to talk about one more thing, which is the inspiration of this film in Frank Dux. This man, as I've already mentioned before earlier in this review, is a very controversial figure because he has made many claims about his participation in this kumite and the records he has and all the things that he was actually involved in with the martial arts world. And he even goes as far as making claims about how the Gracies actually took inspiration from the film Bloodsport and took a name that was given to him where he was called the Ultimate Fighter, and using that as the name for the biggest MMA organization in the entire world.
Victor Moore called me the Ultimate Fight Champion. That's where that whole term comes from, which the Gracies borrowed. after the movie Bloodsport came out, and they took Bloodsport as a movie, and they basically created their UFC based on that.
Right.
So they took the movie, and they also took my handle.
And when I hear him make these claims like in the video you just saw, I do question his legitimacy because I am very familiar with the UFC's history and how it got started, especially with the Gracie family. For anyone that's not familiar with that family, they are pretty much the most famous martial arts family in the entire world. They started the Gracie Jiu-Jitsu Academy, and they have a very famous challenge, which is called the Gracie Challenge, where they went out and challenged anyone out there with any sort of combative background to go up against their Gracie Jiu-Jitsu martial arts to showcase that their form of martial arts is in fact the superior one. And there are plenty of videotapes of them going up against anyone that's willing to challenge them, and pretty much every single time they've always come out on top. And they started getting more momentum, especially here in the States, where they started to come up with the idea of having an event where they can show everyone that Gracie Jiu-Jitsu is in fact the best form of martial arts. So basically it was a propaganda for them to gain more students at their schools, and it definitely worked. But not once have I ever heard them mentioning that they knew Frank Dukes or that they had seen Bloodsport and thought of the idea of starting this organization that we all know now to be called the Ultimate Fighting Championship, or even the fact that they heard that name being given to Frank Dukes and thought that's a great name for a company, let's use that to start the UFC. Never once heard that. And believe me, I've seen countless interviews of that family from the sons, the nieces, the nephews, the fathers, the uncles, everybody. I've heard countless interviews, and not once have I ever heard the name Frank Dukes thrown in the mix there as one of the influencers for the UFC. So, and I also will post up some images here for you to, or videos rather, I meant to say, for you to see where he is performing these extraordinary feats where he's breaking through a bulletproof glass, breaking bottles, and performing a real-life Din Mach. And to me, personally, they look more like magic tricks. I've seen Penn and Teller do very similar feats like that, and we all know it's fake. We just don't know how they actually pull it off. And to me, it seems more or less kind of the same thing. But if he's in fact actually pulling those things off, then more power to him. But I do question his legitimacy, and to be honest with you, I really don't believe a lot of the claims he's making. But if he's telling the truth, then, you know, I don't know for sure, but I just don't trust his claims there. But enough of that, so let's go ahead and get into the ratings now. My overall thoughts on the film is that it's just okay. For me personally, it's a pretty forgettable movie. But when I was a kid, as I've already mentioned before, this was one of the best things I had ever seen, and Van Damme was really one of those reasons. Although this movie is very influential, as I've already mentioned before, in creating some franchises that we're all familiar with here with Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat, and of course, influencing, I meant to say, one of the greatest action stars of all time in Scott Adkins. Outside of that, it doesn't really do anything for me anymore. I forgot to mention in the positives that the soundtrack to this film is actually one of the best things about this movie. If you have access to buy this soundtrack, I would recommend that you do so, because it is a collector's item now, and I would imagine right now that the price is pretty high on it. So, despite what I just said about the movie, there's still something about this film that I know that connects with a lot of people out there. So I still think there's some people out there who have not seen this film who will watch it for the first time and think this movie is fucking awesome. So I would definitely say that this film, for me personally, is worth a shot. And those are my thoughts on the movie. I'd be really curious for anyone out there who has seen this movie and still hold it in such high regard. I want to hear your thoughts as far as why you put this film in such a high pedestal. And for anyone out there who's seen this movie and their opinions have changed, let me know what you guys think of the film as well. And I'll also be very curious for anyone who has never seen the film, and after watching this review, does this encourage you to go check out the film? And if it does, let me know what you guys think of the film in the comment section down below. And be sure to hit the subscribe button if you haven't done so already, and also share and like our videos, and also hit that notification button as well so you can see any upcoming videos we have coming down the pipeline. And be sure to follow us on our social media accounts. We have a Facebook and Instagram page at New Release Wednesdays, and on Twitter at the NRW. And also follow me on social media. You can follow me on Instagram at Rob_Medina0585, on Twitter RobMedina0585, and on Facebook simply just Rob the Movie Guy. And I want to thank all of you for joining me here today. I hope you guys enjoyed this review. And also make sure you check out our other reviews that we have on this channel. I'll make sure to put an iCard for you guys to click on our playlist. But until next time, everybody, thank you very much for joining me here today. Stay safe out there, and cheers.